Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the world of the Maison Parmigiani Fleurier. And to guide us through this exciting keynote, I would like to welcome on stage the CEO, Mr. Guido Terreni.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this keynote on the invention of invisible complications. This is a theme that is very dear to us, and I will take you through inventions, going back a little bit in the history of watchmaking, because this word has had very different meanings in the centuries in which the mechanical art has expressed itself. In fact, I would say that there are different eras of invention in watchmaking. When the first mechanical timepieces were monumentally big, and they appeared between the end of the 13th century. They were free. Time was on bells of churches, mechanical movements were meters, and they were displaying the time for society and on the purpose of evolving society. Then something very magic happens. It becomes portable. And there it's exactly the opposite. In 1505, the first watch that was made possible to carry around, one was on this so-called pomandier, which were spheres that people were carrying around, and obviously they were for very few, and they were for very affluent people. So there was already a step in miniaturizing the mechanic, but still an object that was quite big. Then, in the 16th century, you start seeing the first pocket watches. And wearing a watch was in the pocket for 300 years. So here you start really in the invention of going smaller again, but also with two axes of where the intellect of watchmakers went. That was on the time accuracy, the pursuit of precision, but also on inventing functions that are useful, because the mechanical art was the only technology available. Still, extremely affluent people could access to this beautiful art, and until the 20th century. At the beginning of the last century, the watch moved on the wrist. Another revolution. Imagine movements that were for pocket watches, they had to become very small. So the whole work that was done on this mechanical art up to now changed completely its scale and changes completely its rules, because in physics, when you go smaller, you have to change everything. And then you get to today's world, where it's not so much about the function, what it does. It's not so much about the precision, and we'll see why, but it's more about an interaction, an emotion that carries watchmaking today. And here, I would say the quest for precision was on the tourbillons, for instance, the escapement, on the high frequency to go smaller in the section of the second for chronographs, or anti-magnetic properties to avoid that magnetic fields affect this. But then something happened last century. Quartz came in, a new technology that is much more precise, that is much more cheap to produce. Again, it changes the rules. What does a mechanical watch have to do? And almost Switzerland went bankrupt, the whole industry, in the 70s in the quartz crisis due to this technology. In the functions were useful for chronometers. different things that happened for society, like aviation that brought the flyback function into that, or GMT when the world became smaller through the telephone because you had to call somebody and you had to know what time it was on the other side of the world, or aviation again that makes us move, or diving bezel for sport, leisure, or military purposes. And then something comes in the world like smartwatches. You remember in 2015, those who are old enough, in Basel, Apple came with the ambition to do a luxury Apple Watch in gold, $20,000 was the price, and it lasted very little time. Nobody remembers it. So infinite functions on the wrist, but again, that's not the quest for high horology today. So we can say that high horology inventions, they resist new technologies. There is a cultural quest now to express the art of mechanic, going back and celebrating this art, because in the 70s, luxury timepieces everybody was going quartz, and now you have all the functions you want on an iWatch or on a smartwatch, but that is not anymore what people are looking in horology. So at Parmigiani, we have our own way of understanding what luxury is about. And luckily, luxury is so big that it's made of many facets, and it's made of interpretations of what a watch stands for. And this is really what we believe. This is what we really want to underline in this beautiful world of mechanics, our interpretation of what the emotion on the wrist should be about. So precision is no longer the challenge, because even if a cost-certified movement has a tolerance of 0 + 10 seconds a day. So, I mean, that is not as accurate as a quartz watch or a radio guided timekeeper. So you can't, obviously you have to be accurate, because timekeeping has to be accurate, but not at the sake of the maximum precision. You might remember before the quartz crisis, there were plenty of certification of chronometry, and competition amongst brands was who was the most precise, and there were prizes for that, especially in the canton of Neuchâtel, there were plenty, and this is not there anymore, because clients are looking for other things on the wrist. And the function now, if you are flying on an airplane and you needed to fly back to calculate your navigation, 10 seconds north, and then 20 seconds northeast, a pilot used to press a button and you had to fly back that helped him guide his route. Now you have electronic information that help a pilot much more. So technology has been surpassed for functionality, but the mechanical art has to stay in the idea of doing something, but trying a way which is more emotional, which more giving you a sensation that is different. And at Parmigiani, we consider that luxury is a private experience. As I said, luxury can be done in many, many ways. But what is private luxury? Private luxury is an educated luxury. The more you go high in luxury, the more you go deep in understanding, the more you go deep in cultural references, and the more you go deep in the why of things. And the less you care about a social recognition. You already passed that step. No? You are trying to express not what society is willing to make you buy, but what you are about. Money is not anymore the status to show. Money becomes the access to a world that is defined by other things. And those other things are education, our taste, our understanding what you are showing with a watch. It's more wearing a timepiece that is an accessory to you and not being defined by what you're buying. It's a bit the contrary of hype, if I may summarize it. So this is what guides us. And this is extremely important to a brand like Parmigiani, which is not about appearance, but it's a lot about substance. And this is what Michel is about. Our founder embodies these values with his whole life. Michel Parmigiani is a living legend of restoration. Restoration is probably the most important art in watchmaking because it conserves, but through the conservation of the timepiece, you learn and you understand the different eras of what watchmaking went through, and you have to master the repairing of these eras with the technique of that time. So you develop an interaction with creators of the past. You speak with those creators, all of them. 500 years of history passed through the fingers of Michel, and by speaking through the mechanic the creators left, he got to understand all the secrets of this beautiful art. And the other thing that he developed is a sensitivity to finishings, because also the aesthetic side of the technology has a role in the appeal and the emotion that you can develop or create. So his mantra is restoration is not a cage to be stuck in. It's not something to restore for the sake of a museum activity. Yes, of course, it's important to recover a piece from its worsened condition and make it live again through his artwork. But his true understanding is that not everything has already been invented in watchmaking, and watchmaking has to become something to project yourself in continuing to evolving luxury and to continue to evolving the experience. Luxury has always been about pursuing excellence. It's always been about accompanying society in its evolution. It's always been about giving a personal pleasure to a customer, until probably 30 years ago, when it became a very big business and brands starting to read it in their past and starting to understand that you can build important businesses by replicating the past. And this gave birth to a fever on vintage, because then you go back and buy the original. Michel is not about this. And you can see this in his innovation. He sees restoration as a source of knowledge, not as a cage to be trapped in. And these are one of many examples that the brand has been expressing with its creativity. This is the first Bugatti in the early years of the company. We had a beautiful partnership with this car maker that, and Michel understood or tried to express the correspondence between a magnificent car and a watch that you have on your wrist. And he designed, through the mechanics, the engine transversally to the watch, and the dial facing the driver, because when you're driving, the watch is looking at the window. So it's all thought in order to have an experience which is extremely meaningful, extremely elitist, because we're talking about very happy people that can experience this, but designing through the technical ideas. And there's another beautiful sentence that I love in his quotes. Technique is beautiful. And it's true, because every single technical choice that you choose to do to rationally achieve an object which is a display of a certain function, or how you build a movement, is an aesthetic choice before even knowing where the movement will be. Take, for instance, the example of how you treat a second hand. A second hand on a simple three-hand watch can be expressing sportiveness, can be expressing classic elegance, or in between the two. So if you look at the petite seconde at 6 o'clock, you would go more into a classic mood. If the counter is very small, you would go probably in a vintage mode. So in the 30s and the 50s, those beautiful dials with a very small petite seconde. Or if you go at the central second hand, you are more into the sportiveness, because you're looking at the precision of the second, and the second is very invasive in the dial. Or you take it away, and you don't have the second at all, and this is probably the best blend between sportiveness and elegance, and that's what we chose to do on the Tonda PF. But many other examples are done through that quote, because even this probably is the most easy to understand. All technical choices are there to express an aesthetic before expressing a function. And the innovations that we are building now is we have reached the third world first since we went for this philosophy of invisible inventions, is on the body, on the matrix of the PF. The Tonda PF is our sport elegant watch that has a style which is extremely pure, that has reference to finishings that are very traditional, like a hand guilloché, that has streamlined to be very small, almost a texture on the dial, not to be invasive to the reading. But the idea is really get to the essence of things, go to an aesthetic that is extremely refined in the philosophy of the design language, but also in the philosophy of the mechanics that is behind. Finishings are at the highest level of platinum bezel, nurdle. The choice of the logo without the lettering of the brand is another reference to private luxury. The logo is for the others, and you're going to use a graphism that is for the owner. So these are all elements that build up an emotion, that build up a language of design, that build up a feeling for the owner of what he has on his wrist. And the first world premiere was in 2022. We were in the middle of the pandemic. We were all eager to go back traveling, and we wanted to have a watch that was addressing this in a very discreet way, non-ostentatious. You're not at the restaurant shouting that you're an international person, that you rule the world. No, you're there with your elegance, a two-hander when you're not traveling. And then when you are traveling, you have the function that comes to life. It's invisible when you don't need it, and it comes to life, and then it disappears again. And the first was the GMT. The second was a very big function in the industry, which was the bezel of a diver watch. Now, this is the second biggest function in the industry, but it's not really a function that's done through watchmaking. It's done through a case. So by the idea of saying, could we reinterpret this function like no other did before, doing it through the movement, something new comes out. A minute rattrapante that is able to do the same function through two hands that are overlapping, and you're setting the time in which you have to do an event and stop it. Instead of going out of the water, it can be, I don't know, you're a lawyer, you invoice at the half an hour, and then you see the extra time when you're going forward, or you can use it in any way. And now you're getting to the third introduction, which is the third world first, and it is probably the most difficult exercise in this philosophy of inventions that are invisible. This is the function that you can all immediately understand what we're talking about, because it's invisible. We have a pusher at 8 o'clock, and when you don't need it, we have a three-hander watch, hour, minute, and for the first time, a central second hand. And the function is a chronograph. So here, under a simple, elegant timepiece, we have hidden one of the most complicated functions in the world, which is a chronograph. And chronographs are probably second only to chiming watches in terms of complexity. So you can imagine the level of challenge that we have had to undergo to make this very simple, intuitive idea come to life. I'll show how it works. So this watch has been very talked about in this fair. As you can see, probably it's better if I show it on this picture. It is a coaxial chronograph. So at the first push, at rest, the chronograph is invisible. You saw it before. You cannot see. You just see hour, minute, second. Then you have a monopusher at 8 o'clock, which is the most comfortable position to press something. You hold your case with the finger at 2 and your thumb at 8. You press very precisely. And you have a monopusher. Usually monopushers do start, stop, and reset. And in this case, they do something different. At the start function, in reality, you have a flyback function, where the flyback means that you press a start, 3 hands that you were looking at before that were telling the current time go at noon, and they start running at 1 push. Then you measure the event, and while you're looking at your chronograph, you have 2 hidden hands that you see here in gold, pink gold. That is your current time that is unveiled when the chronograph is working. When you stop the chronograph, you read your measurement of your event, and at reset, usually reset brings hands of the chronograph back to noon. In reality, here, reset, you're going to hide the 2 pink gold hands, and you're back to your solo tempo function. So this has been an extraordinary challenge from a technical point of view. In the function, you have a triple flyback start. You have a double split second function, because instead of being a split second, it's a split minute and a split hour. Those 2 hands of the chronograph have to catch up with the running time and cover them, so it's a double rattrapante function. Monopusher, a column wheel, 3 clutches to make that happen. Only 100 meters water resistance and only 13 mm in heights, which was very important to keep it wearable, because when you have 5 hands on the top of the one on top of the other, it's very difficult to keep it small. So to us, inventions become truly extraordinary when they do something emotional. You have 2 magic moments when you press that button. And during this week, to me, it was an emotional pleasure to see the smile on the face of those who were pressing the button, because you don't expect this reunion of these 3 hands at 12 o'clock. And the other magic moment is when the function disappears and you don't see the chronograph anymore. That is what we have as a technical objective to achieve, but what really is the invention is to give to a customer the impression and the sensation that he has something special on his wrist, that nobody knows what it is, and he feels special because it's something in the know-to-know. And this achievement is a simplification of the complication up to the point that probably the ultimate expression is simplifying up to the point that it disappears. So I hope you enjoyed our philosophy. I hope you enjoyed how we see watchmaking that is forward thinking and not with a mirror and looking at the past, how we respect the craft of the art of watchmaking to make this become aesthetically pleasant, but also meaningful. And I'm open to questions, to answer any curiosity you have on what happened in this project and which were the challenges, or what do you think is worthwhile to go deeper? Please.
Thanks a lot. That was really interesting. And I'd like to perhaps ask you if you could articulate a bit more on what the technical challenges were during this journey.
Thank you. Allora, I think when I came up with the idea, it was September 21. And I was so excited that I bumped into Michel, our founder. He was in the office. And I told him this idea that was continuing the episodes of this beautiful saga. And Michel is, you must imagine Michel is a very humble person. He's somebody extremely educated, semi-deep, but is very good. He has a lot of goodwill on what we're doing on the brand. So he looked at me like, I could see his question mark here. And then at a certain point, he just bent his head and he said, well, that's complicated. That's it. And then he didn't say anything else because I could see that he couldn't figure out yet, which was in his rational mind, how can I make that happen? And in fact, it took 4 years to get to this project, and it is not a conventional way of doing a chronograph. You have to go back to a white piece of paper and think, how can you address the rattrapante function hiding the chronograph on top of traditional exercises like the flyback that is already known. But this construction of a chronograph is really revolutionary, although that you don't see it from the outside. The other big challenge was to keep the watch wearable, because you cannot have a beautiful watch and have an uncomfortable feeling on your wrist. The luxury experience has to be flawless in everything. And so I gave a very clear brief to the developers that was, it mustn't be bigger than a 40, and it mustn't be thicker than a 12 mm. And after 2 years, the developers came back, and they were begging, could I please have an extra millimeter? And I said yes, because at the end, it doesn't change the construction, but you have to play with constraints, physics and volumes. Either you do a wider movement, either you do a thicker movement to put everything that you have in mind. But view that a lot of this movement is at the center of the movement. The height was very difficult. So by giving them an extra millimeter, that probably is much less a constraint that giving 2 millimeters wider and a 42 would have been much worse. We said yes to that. So you have to play with compromise, understanding how you can keep that idea possible, but also wearable. Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, please.
I'm very curious to hear about the motivation behind the color of the dial, the mineral blue, the beautiful mineral blue. What motivated that precisely, and are there other colors envisioned for the dial?
Colors are an extraordinary way of displaying our mood. We have a palette that we have built in the last 5 years that are looking for colors that are very easy to wear, but they are not conventional. And this is not very easy to do. So the colors that are through the collection, you saw already a couple of them, the Arctic Rose on the Minute Rattrapante and the Berzaska on the GMT. The Mineral Blue is a different palette colors on the blues, but it's not a conventional blue. Classic blue is something that is supposed to give us a bit of serenity when you look at the watch, a pleasant feeling, something that must not worn you out, because an object like a watch has to be outliving you. So you cannot do a color that is in fashion and then you look at it 2 years down the road and it doesn't fit. And then they have to be also easy to match with your outfit. A watch is something that you don't think in the morning, unless you're a collector that has thousands. But usually you use the same watch for a certain period of time in your life, and then you dress as you want. So it has to fit in your wardrobe and the colors that they're wearing. So our choices are really trying to go in that direction, and we're inspired by architecture, because when you decorate a home, you don't redo the walls every 6 months, so you have to choose colors that are there to stay. And in architecture, you have a lot of research on this, and that's why we're applying it on our dials.
helpful.
On doing other colors, it's too early. First, we start with one. But to answer your question fully, maybe 3-4 years down the road, you will see something coming up. Anybody else? Any questions? Yes, please.
Hi, thank you for an amazing presentation. I had a question because you mentioned you came up with the idea in 2021.
Yep.
And I was interested to know, how does an idea like that come about? Was it completely random? Did you take inspiration from a parallel industry or something from the past?
Well, when I entered in the company, we had a lot of introspective work to do. And with the team, we went really down to what do we want to stand for in watchmaking, which is the customer we want to serve, and I think, and which are the values of the brand, which are the aesthetic codes of the brand. So when you ask these questions to your team, you are going to the core of the why of a brand. And the brand is the biggest patrimony that you have to protect and you have to nourish. It's like a person. You have your values that stay still, but then in time you evolve with but you're still you. You're not an actor that changes. You're not Mr. Jekyll and Dr. Hyde. You can't do that in watchmaking. So you have to decide what you want to express. So that customer who made the brand so prestigious in the early days is a customer which is very independent in his mind. He doesn't care what people think about him, but he's interested in interesting horology. Interesting horology means I want to be surprised. I want to experience an emotion. I want to feel that I have a well-made and a sophisticated finishing, everything that was essential. But it's also a question of aesthetic. You have to also have the style that fits in this philosophy. So when you choose what to do with this, you play with your aesthetic codes of the brand. For instance, a logo at 12 o'clock is an aesthetic code of the brand. The guilloche on the dial is an aesthetic code of the brand, but it's very old-fashioned. So to do a contemporary aesthetic, you downsize the scale and you make it become a texture that is almost invisible. So this subtleness of the brand, which is the fil rouge of the brand, has to be nourished through intellect and through execution. When you tackle a complication, that's part of the philosophy. So the subtleness of the invisibility is something that excites. It's not ostentatious. It's something that is in the brand. It's simple to use. It's intuitive. It's in the brand because it goes to the core of the idea, the essence. And so when we came up, because it's not only me that has the idea, but the GMT was the 29th of January 21. 3 days I was in company, and I just said, can we do this function for going back to enjoying the pleasure, and can we do it in a way which has never been done before, and it's extremely flawless. And that gave us the idea with the rattrapante, and the rattrapante function, the split-second function, which is patented in the 1800, end of the 20s of the 1800s. So it's almost 195 years before we used it on a different hand than a chronograph. In fact, when we unveiled it here, there was we called it GMT rattrapante. Some journalists were saying, well, where's the chronograph? No, there's no chronograph because it's on another hand. So that was the first idea that gave us this beautiful feeling of a function that appears and disappears. And then also the idea of doing something that has never been done. So that was not thought as a first of others. It was thought to do something that has never been done before. Then you start thinking, what comes next? And you start saying, well, GMT is not a small function. It's something relevant. So are there other relevant functions? And the same day that I came out with the Chrono Mysterio idea, before I had the idea of the scuba bezel done with the movement. So the fil rouge is this invisible function that appears and disappears, this moment of rattrapante which gives you the excitement of something that happens unexpectedly, and applying it to the third function, the chronograph, was the biggest challenge, but it's the same philosophy, it's the same idea executed in different functions. Now you might ask me, are there other functions that you can do in the same way in the future? Of course they are. But we have to understand when, how frequently, the potential of that idea, because if it becomes something niche for a geek, it wouldn't be economically sustainable. That's why we tackle first these 3 big functions, and then we will see what to do next. Hope I answered your question.
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Anybody else? We can call it. Okay, thank you so much for sharing your passion with us. It's a pleasure to have shared that with me, from me. Thank you.